God has preserved and is now presenting evidences of all of the major events that are mentioned in the Bible. And Satan, in anticipation of what God was about to do, has raised up stories about the Ark of the Covenant being in Ethiopia, about Noah's Ark being on Mount Ararat. He has brought all kinds of stories out to try to muddy the water and confuse the issues about these important things. Now, God says, my word will not return unto me void, but it will accomplish the thing whereunto it is sent. We live on a planet that has nearly 6 billion people. Many of these folks have been raised Hindus and Buddhists. They believe that their God is a piece of stone or a cobra, a deadly snake. And folks, if you and I had been born and raised there, we would believe the same thing. So let's don't fool ourselves. Christ died for these people. God loves them, and He has preserved these things and is now showing them so that everyone can see. The Bible tells us that we should be able to give a reason for the hope that is within us to them that ask. So anyway, God is providing these things that you will see here. And as quickly as possible, we're making them available to everybody. When we find people that are going into the mission fields, we supply them with free material so that they can show it. This material is now being used in Russia, Japan, Korea, Africa, South America, and we are getting letters, phone calls, and that sort of thing, telling the result that it has. Now, one of the things that really moved my heart, and Brother Groover is familiar with this, I was at a university showing this material and answering questions afterwards. At the end of the program, 2 men that I had been warned about that would chew me up and spit me out, bless their hearts, came up and they had a few questions. Well, the Lord gave me a few answers for those men. 2 years later, I got a letter from one of them, and it started off, it says, "It may interest you to know that I am now a baptized follower of our Lord Jesus Christ." So all of the darkness that Satan has created on this earth is not in Africa. There's a lot of people right here that have been taught things that are not true. And this man went on to say in his letter, he said, I had never heard it explained in a manner that I could believe before. Now, there are folks that just simply tell people the Bible says it, so you have got to believe it. Well, there's over 600 Protestant denominations in America, and all of these people have a different opinion of what the Bible says. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that out of 600 with 600 different opinions, at least 599 are mistaken. And then you go into the probabilities of whether that last one is right or not, and they're pretty slim. The Bible says there is not one that doeth good, and it says that your righteousness is as filthy rags. So folks, when we've had one of our best days, we're still short of what God would like us to be. And so we are all in need of God's cleansing and rehabilitation. We've lived on a planet that's so polluted with sin that we have become accustomed to it. And many of the things that we don't think anything about, God cannot and will not tolerate in His eternal universe. You look out today and you listen to the news, and people that used to shake their fist at somebody for cutting them off in traffic or, throw a few cuss words at them, now pull a gun and blow them away. I mean, it is getting deadly out there. All of this is the results of people ignoring the requirements of God. If we read the 20th chapter of Exodus, what God said, His requirements were we would all, if we lived by those, have peace and happiness, everybody. Us stupid people like myself wouldn't be taken advantage of by clever folks, and weak folks would not be taken advantage of by powerful folks. We would all live in harmony and happiness. And that is what God will restore on this earth. And if you and I want to participate, and I personally believe you would not be here if you didn't want to, if we want to participate in that, we can go to the Father in the name and blood of His Son and ask for forgiveness and for rehabilitation so that we'll be ready when He comes. Now then, we have heard many, many claims, and what I would like you to do is watch this video prayerfully, and at the end I'll have a few comments, especially about the Ark of the Covenant. But some people have told me, well, Ron, all you need is the Ark of the Covenant. You don't need the rest of that. Well, if God preserved them and is bringing them out, somebody needs them. Okay, you and I may not, but somebody does. He doesn't waste His efforts. And if I had been raised a Hindu or a Buddhist, I'd need a whole lot more than I think I need now. And the fact is, I probably need a whole lot more than I think I do, if you see where I'm coming from. So if somebody that knows how to operate this equipment will fire up our video, and if you're somewhere where you can't see the screen, please relocate to where you can see it. And this video is 1 hour and 10 minutes long.
That should work.
Okay. Anyway, we'll go ahead and show the video. I'll come back up at the end and make a few comments about the Ark of the Covenant.
On June 20th, 1987, after 10 years of intense research, the Turkish government announced to the world the discovery of Noah's Ark and the dedication of it and the surrounding area as a national park. In 1977, Ron Wyatt made his first trip to this area. It was during this first trip that Ron found numerous huge drogue-style anchor stones, all the same approximate size as the one here. These were all in a direct alignment with the boat-shaped object, evidencing their being cut loose or dropped as the Ark entered the area of its final rest. These bear ancient iconographic inscriptions of the 8 survivors of the flood. In December of 1978, an earthquake in this highly remote area dropped the soil from around the formation, allowing Ron to see for the first time the rib timbers and deck support timbers visibly exposed on the sides. A large crack was also formed along the entire length of the object, and he was able to measure the depth and take samples for analysis. The analyses showed a very high organic carbon content consistent with ancient wood. Later metal detection surveys and subsurface interface radar showed an incredible man-made structure encapsulated within the formation. Keels and keelsomes, bulkheads, decks, and even partitions between the cages became visible through these scientific devices.
Do you believe Noah's Ark actually existed? Could the legend that sounds like a fairy tale really become proven fact? Well, the search has been going on since biblical times. And in a moment, you're going to meet some people who are positive they have found the Ark. Now, we know such claims have been made before. But a few months ago, these people came to 2020 with some new and intriguing scientific findings. We followed them to the mountains of eastern Turkey. And what you'll see is a bizarre adventure with a host of unlikely characters. Tom Jarrell's story takes many twists and turns.
Consider, if the biblical story of creation is fact and not fable, then the theory of evolution is all wet. A confirmed discovery would be the greatest archaeological find of all times and provide for religious fundamentalists hard evidence of the Bible's absolute reliability. Thus, Noah's Ark has become the most controversial artifact ever recorded by man. That's the seductive beauty that brings them here, snow-capped Mount Ararat. The explorers looked for the Ark there since that's the highest point around here. And as the floodwaters receded, presumably that's where it would have landed. But the Bible describes the mountains of Ararat, mountains plural. Is it possible that the Ark came to rest on one of the smaller sister mountains to Ararat? Such a theory is abhorrent to the old-time fundamentalist, the true believers who are unbending in their faith, that the Bible was referring only to Ararat as the Ark site.
Have you ever seen anything like this? Look at the grain in this thing. It almost looks like wood.
But now there are fundamentalists who are contradicting that claim. They are the new believers. Ron Wyatt and Dave Fassel believe they have found the Ark on a slope of what the local people call Doomsday Mountain, some 15 miles south of Mount Ararat. Their Ark fever is fueled by expeditions on foot, deep into the surrounding valleys. Here, following a local Kurdish villager who drew maps on his palms, Wyatt and Fassel have made what they consider exciting and important discoveries. Apparently old Armenian tombstones that commemorate the survival of Noah and his family.
Same kind of strange stone. When the early Christians found these things, they carved 8 crosses on there for the 8 survivors. This whole valley was known as the region of 8.
Ron, what's the significance of the placement of the crosses in these stones?
All right, Tom, this is an iconographic representation here of a man, the head of the household, his wife, his 3 sons, and his 3 daughters or daughters-in-law. And as you can see here, the 8 crosses, the ones to his left are the lady folks in the family. The ones to his right are the men folks in the family.
Do these fit the story of Noah?
They do.
To Wyatt and Fassel, these stones appear to be in direct alignment to the boat-shaped site on Doomsday Mountain. The boat-shaped site was first found and photographed by a Turkish army captain back in 1959. It was quickly explored and dismissed as a freak of nature. But Wyatt, an amateur archaeologist, rekindled interest in it a few years ago. He brought in Dave Fassel, a marine salvage expert, to assess it. The Doomsday Mountain team brought in some high technology to explore the oldest legend of man. They began scanning their site with a molecular frequency generator. It's a device used by surgeons to pinpoint cancer tumors, and it's been used by Fassel to locate underwater treasure. This time, the molecular frequency generator began to pick up a unique pattern of iron lines beneath the earth.
Okay, bring that one up.
They began placing ribbons along those lines. The finished shape, outlined by the ribbons, was that of a huge ship, the approximate length and width of Noah's Ark, as described in the Bible. The fascinating field of ribbons soon attracted higher academic interest.
That looks like iron. Okay.
Dr. John Baumgartner, a physicist with Los Alamos Laboratories, sent samples back to the lab for analysis and confirmed that the metal they were tracing with the ribbons was indeed iron. With the width and the length known, the only remaining question was depth. By locating the depth of the hull, they could determine if the boat-shaped object had the cargo capacity described in the biblical ark. To resolve this final issue, Wyatt and Fassel brought geologist Tom Finner to Turkey with his company's heavy-duty subsurface radar equipment. Gear like this located the black box cockpit recorder on the floor of the frozen Potomac River after the Air Florida crash. Suppose this rock were a foot or 2 feet underground. Would it give you a reading as to where that was? Could you locate it?
Yes, we could.
Is it possible that there will be a moment at which you will say, this is a man-made object?
The symmetry of the feature suggests it's a boat. I hope to prove that the underground structure is in fact that of a boat.
Indeed, there is something beneath that rock besides rock. A radar device developed by Geophysical Survey Systems in Hudson was used on the mountain. The device, called SIR, is used by energy exploration companies to analyze what's below the Earth's surface. According to SIR, something man-made is under Mount Ararat.
This data does not represent natural geology. It's a man-made structure. These reflections are occurring very periodic, too periodic to be random natural type interfaces.
The governor of Ari had Ron demonstrate the radar. When he found what looked like a broken timber near the surface, The governor had it dug up and gave it to Ron to be verified. The lab test revealed organic carbon. It was petrified wood. But the final proof was when it was sectioned. The evidence was obvious. Not only could the internal wood structure be seen, it was also clearly laminated wood. 3 separate layers could be seen. The adhesive material, or glue, had seeped out and hardened on one end and was perfectly aligned with the internal layers.
Our last trip out there this past June, we found this very impressive rivet. And if you'll notice here, the plate itself is just a little more than 1/4 inch in thickness. It's approximately 3.5 inches in diameter, the plate itself, and then the shaft of the rivet is roughly 1 inch to 1.25 inches in diameter. And if you'll notice here, it was struck while it was hot and flared out the end of the shaft so that it would not slide back through the hole in this washer. And this shows that their abilities to use metal was quite advanced, quite sophisticated, and folks, there are thousands of these rivets on this boat. In fact, at every joint where the wooden structures are held together, they're held together by large metal plates which are predominantly iron, and then these rivets.
Good morning. I was just wondering how the size of the structure compared with the dimensions in the Bible.
Okay, Moses was educated in Egypt. We're told that in the New Testament and also in the Old Testament. And the Royal Egyptian cubit, which he was familiar with and we believe used in the giving the dimensions of the ark, is 20.6 inches, and 300 of those is exactly 515 feet, and that is the length dimension of the boat. The boat has splayed some, and this is to be expected in an aging boat. So the width is a little greater than that specified in the Bible, but you figure the degree of splaying and you come up with very close measurements, very similar to those in the Bible.
The Turkish government has recently completed a beautiful visitor center just above the ark so that visitors of every faith from all nations can visit and see the ark for themselves. Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities of the plain. In Genesis 19, we read how these cities were destroyed by God with brimstone and fire from heaven, the first biblical record of God's vengeance upon evil since the Great Flood. My husband, biblical archaeologist Ron Wyatt, never planned to search for these cities, but in 1989, while working on another project, he was suddenly impressed to stop and examine some odd-shaped, whitish-colored formations along the western shore of the Dead Sea. After driving past these at least 30 or 40 times in the past 12 years, this time they suddenly looked like the shapes of city walls and buildings. Pulling over, he and his crew closely examined these desolate areas. Taking samples of the material, they discovered that they broke right off in their hand and disintegrated into dust the consistency of talcum powder, as Greg Brewer shows us here. In August of 1990, Ron returned to these sites to thoroughly explore them, 5 sites which he had thus far located. I accompanied him this trip along with Marv and Renetta Wilson of Garland, Texas. As we approached the first site we examined, we all could easily see the shapes Ron had described. As no roads led into these areas, we pulled our car off the road and began the long, difficult hike. There was no doubt that these areas were unique to the immediate surrounding area. It was very difficult to walk there, for the loose material made walking an arduous chore. Following what clearly looked like the shape of an outer wall, we soon met with a most breathtaking sight. The wall had ended, and we were now looking down into what appeared to be the entrance into the city. But before we entered, our interest was captivated by a most unusual find. About 100 yards from the entrance, upon a high level, was a singular shape. As we viewed it from all angles, we all agreed it plainly bore the shape of a sphinx. We later found more of these sphinx shapes, which we'll see later in the film. As we entered the open section, we soon found ourselves walking along very distinctive paths which communicated with one another just as our streets today. As we approached what appeared to be a dead end, we found it turned to the right and continued along until it met another street. There was distinct order here. These were clearly once streets, and along these streets were the shapes of buildings. Even to our untrained eye, the evidence was undeniable. The ziggurat shape near the entrance was almost perfectly preserved. Our research had yielded the fascinating fact that substances burned with sulfur or brimstone had a remaining ash that was heavier than the initial unburned substance. That explained our question as to why the ash of these cities had been able to remain all these 3,900 years. The layering present in all the formations was another positive evidence that whatever these once were, they had been burned at temperatures exceeding 4,000 or 5,000 degrees. This layering effect was the result of thermal ionization. Whenever a substance is burned at extremely high temperatures, the ions of the various substances being burned attract and repel, distorting the flame. Ron drew our attention to features present here which simply do not occur naturally. He showed us a section which revealed a broken double wall which extended toward us at a perfect 90-degree angle. The site we were examining was located at the base of Masada, and soon we all decided that we should go to the top of Masada and film these areas from there. As we took the cable car to the top, the view was breathtaking. The shape of the city was perfectly revealed below us. Here we saw a giant platform-like area, perfectly symmetrical, which was identical to the temple areas of other ancient cities, such as the biblical Shushan or Susa, located in present-day Iran. Then we saw the raised section which we had climbed upon earlier, with the sphinx shape and the ziggurat. We were all convinced, but we also knew there had to be more evidence than this to convince others.
Now the Bible tells us that it rained fire and brimstone upon the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now what you see in front of you here is the results of large and small, well, varying sized chunks of sulfur, burning sulfur that have hit. And what we find here is that God rained this burning sulfur down upon this city, and rain is a perfect description of it. It landed just in the pattern that rain would fall, and the stuff, of course, the accumulative heat of all of this upon the city set the entire thing ablaze. The flashpoint of every material there, metal, stone, of course the people, and everything burned, and this sulfur continued to burn, and it vitrified the material around it after it had burned it all up, sealed itself off from the oxygen, and then of course smothered itself out. And in each of these little crystalline capsules here is a varying size chunk of sulfur, and there are millions of these in these ashes that we have here. Now some of them we have cracked open so you can see the sulfur inside, and others we have left intact, but there are millions of these here. So this shows that God indeed rained fire and brimstone upon these cities. And if you'll look in your dictionary, under brimstone, you'll find that it is sulfur.
As soon as he got home from that trip, Ron took several of the samples to Galbraith Labs near Knoxville, Tennessee. The yellow balls in the center of the reddish rings proved to be 95.72% sulfur, with traces of several other elements, all of which he was told would contribute to an extremely high temperature fire. When Ron asked them if they could perform a BTU test to determine the degree of heat this would give off, he was told that they couldn't because it would damage their stainless steel testing chamber. The material surrounding the encapsulated sulfur was also tested and proved to be ash. At home, we did our own small test and burned some of the sulfur in a spoon. The purplish flame is indicative of the intense heat, which prohibited our holding the spoon as it burned. We later discovered our spoon had holes in it from the fire. Then, we placed a small piece of the outer material also in the spoon and attempted to burn it, but it wouldn't burn at all. It didn't even darken. It was already completely consumed by fire, and nothing was left to ignite. In 1978, temporarily unable to continue work on Noah's Ark, Ron Wyatt took his two sons, Danny and Ronnie, to a site in Egypt he believed might be where the Red Sea crossing took place. When they arrived at the site on the Gulf of Aqaba, they found a Phoenician-style column lying on the beach. The water had eroded away the inscription, but in 1984, Ron found a matching column on the opposite shore in Saudi Arabia, still standing, with the inscription still intact. He was later able to translate the words Pharaoh, Mizraim, Death, Edom, Yahweh, and Solomon from this second column, and from this he believes these columns were erected by King Solomon and dedicated to Yahweh for the great miracle of the crossing of the sea on dry land. Israel was occupying the Sinai Peninsula at this time in 1978 and moved this first column from the beach and set it in concrete across the road, as you can see here. Diving at this site, they filmed numerous coral-encrusted chariot parts, such as these two chariot wheels still attached to an axle, one wheel flat on the ground and the other in the air. This is a six-spoked wheel. They found a vast amount of artifacts which loudly attest to the miracle which occurred here. Horse and human skeletal remains are still preserved by the coral, as are chariot cabs without wheels, wheels without cabs, some wheels on axles, and some not. He retrieved a chariot wheel hub, which he presented to Nassif Mohammed Hassan, who was the director of antiquities in Cairo, Egypt. But the most astounding find was this gold-veneered four-spoke chariot wheel, which he was able to video in March of 1988, but he was unable to retrieve it as the wood had disintegrated, leaving only a thin gold shell. There were many factors which led Ron to this site, but three were most compelling. First, in order for the Israelites to have left Egypt proper, they would have had to have begun their journey to the Red Sea on the eastern side of the Gulf of Suez. This left only the Gulf of Aqaba. Second, there is only one place along the shoreline of the Gulf of Aqaba which could hold the perhaps 3 million people. This area is so large it can be seen from this satellite photo. And finally, when Ron studied the bathymetric maps of the British Admiralty in London, he saw a perfect underwater pathway led across the Gulf at this point. On either side of this line across the Gulf of Aqaba, the waters were 5,000 feet deep, dropping off like a deep gorge. But here, at this precise spot, was an area leading across which gently sloped at a 6-degree angle to a depth of only 900 to 1,000 feet in the center. As Ron and the boys journeyed across the Sinai to this site, they noticed large boulders pushed over to the sides of the wadis or canyons, allowing caravans and travelers to pass through. But as they dove into the Gulf, about 1.5 miles out and 200 feet deep, they were thrilled to see this same stone-cleared pathway continued and was still evident in the crystal-clear waters. With the overwhelming evidence of the chariot parts scattered across the Gulf, Ron knew that Mount Sinai was in Saudi Arabia. Studying maps, he saw that Jabal el-Lawz fit the biblical description of this holy mountain. Unable to get a visa to enter Saudi Arabia, Ron and his 2 sons finally decided to enter without one. He had learned that the normal procedure if someone were caught without a visa there was to escort the visitor to the border and see that they did not re-enter. They found Mount Sinai with the altar and much more still intact in this uninhabited area, but as they were leaving, they were abruptly arrested and imprisoned for 78 days, accused of being Israeli spies. When they were finally released, they were told that a man had contacted the Saudi embassy and reported the Wyatts to be Israeli spies pretending to be archaeologists. This man had been a trusted friend who had worked with Ron on Noah's Ark.
Ronald Wyatt and his sons are with us in the studios of our Nashville affiliate WTVF to tell us all about it. Gentlemen, good morning.
Morning. Morning.
Mr. Wyatt, you there in the middle, and
yes.
Your sons on either side. Why did you, I didn't know that Mount Sinai was in Saudi Arabian territory. Why did you think it was?
We found some chariot parts that looked like the chariots found in King Tut's tomb in the Gulf of Aqaba, west of this Jabal el-Lawz. We found these at depths from 60 feet out to 200 feet and over a stretch of about 1.5 miles. And we believe that that was the crossing site. And so in the biblical narrative, they arrived at Mount Sinai after crossing the Red Sea. The language in the Bible indicates that they stayed in a mountain, enclosed in a mountain. So an aerial map showed that this Jebel El Lawz had a large valley enclosed in the rim of an ancient volcano. There's about 5,000 acres in there. We felt this was the place. And in Exodus 24:4 and in Leviticus 6:28, 11:33, and 15:12, it tells of some artifacts that were to be found. There was to be 12 pillars of stone and an altar and some pottery. And so this is why we looked at that particular mountain.
From the beach in Egypt on the Gulf of Aqaba, we have gazed across the water with anguish for many years. Knowing that Moses led the great multitude across the Red Sea at this exact spot, Ron Wyatt knew in 1978 that Mount Sinai lay beyond that distant shore. Mount Sinai, where the law was written by God's own finger. Finally, we can see this majestic mountain where God's own presence once rested. Jebel El Lawz in northwest Saudi Arabia. In Galatians 4:25, the Apostle Paul tells us, "For this Agar is Mount Sinai in Arabia." Exodus 19:18, "And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire." Could this blackened peak be the result of the consuming fire of God's own presence resting upon it? In 1 Kings 19, verses 8 and 9, we read how Elijah came to Horeb and went into a cave. Here we see a very large cave just below the solitary tree which is between two massive granite boulders. As we view the holy precinct, the area at the foot of the mountain, we can see a large fence and a guardhouse, which was erected immediately after Ron Wyatt showed this site to a Saudi archaeologist in 1985. This fence follows along the line of 18-foot diameter boundary markers which Moses was directed to erect by God. This sign by the guardhouse states that this is an archaeological site passed by royal decree and that it is unlawful to trespass, subject to penalty. And as we pan to the left, here we can see where the fence ends on the other side. And now, as we pan away from the holy precinct, we look out into the area of the camp of the Israelites. There are several archaeological remains still here, but this one is of particular interest for us. In Exodus chapter 32, we read of the golden calf and how Aaron fashions it. And in verse 5, "And when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made proclamation and said, 'Tomorrow is a feast to the Lord.'" There is little doubt that these are the remains of that very altar which Aaron built to the golden calf. When the Saudi archaeologist from Riyadh University, who went there with Ron in 1985, saw this, he was very excited. The 12 petroglyphs of cows and bulls captured his interest because they are found nowhere else in Saudi Arabia. The style of their horns and bodies is distinctly ancient Egyptian, the same style found in the temples and tombs of ancient Egypt. Unable to enter the holy precinct from the front and climb upon Mount Sinai, we now approach it from the backside, where the two large boulders with the solitary tree between them can be seen. Climbing the mountain here, we soon find ourselves on top of a large, sheltered plateau. Here we have a better view of the blackened peak. Panning the area, we find it to easily be large enough to accommodate the 70 elders who accompanied Moses up into the mountain at one point in time. The peak to the left is where the solitary tree is, but it cannot be seen because of our angle. And just ahead, over that ledge, lies the holy precinct. Looking down, we see the fence which follows along the bounds set by Moses, and just beyond that fence is part of the camp of the Israelites. Zooming in closer to the holy precinct, we can see the remains of an ancient foundation. Could this be the remains of the first tabernacle which Moses removed to the outside of the camp after the golden calf incident? Exodus 33 verse 7, "And Moses took the tabernacle and pitched it without the camp, afar off from the camp, and called it the tabernacle of the congregation." And directly adjacent to this foundation are the remains of an altar built of stone. Exodus 20:25, "And thou wilt make me an altar of stone, thou shalt not build it of hewn stone." Panning further, we stop to look at the tracks made by the Bedouins' trucks before the fence was erected. This gives you a better idea of the size perspective of the enormity of this area. And here we see the guard building and archaeological sign which we saw earlier from the front. Returning back to the foundation we saw earlier, the camera begins to pan outward where we will be able to see the location of the altar to the golden calf. Exodus 32:19, "And it came to pass, as soon as he came nigh unto the camp, that he saw the calf and the dancing, and Moses' anger waxed hot, and he cast the tables out of his hands and brake them beneath the mount." Still visible today also is the stream bed which descended from the mountain to give the people abundant water for themselves and their flocks and herds. Preparing to leave, we can look down upon the backside of the mountain, and again we see the vast plain area. Arriving on the opposite side of this mountain, we find an area which fits the biblical description of Rephidim, the last encampment of the Israelites before they reach Mount Sinai. Exodus 17:6. The Lord tells Moses, "Behold, I will stand before thee there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. The most incredible evidence for this sight is the giant split boulder upon a hill with evidence that large streams of water flowed from it. The rocks still display the erosion pattern of tremendous amounts of water descending from this rock. And as we travel through the split in the boulder, we soon can see the channels cut in the rock from the water flow on the other side. And panning outward, we can see these channels continue out into the plain. After the battle, when Israel had defeated the Amalekites, the Bible tells us that Moses did something. As we go to Exodus 17, verse 15, and Moses built an altar and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi. Here are the remains of a very ancient altar, part of it fallen, perhaps from an earthquake or Bedouins looking for treasure inside. But enough is still intact to show it was indeed an altar, as it is not hollow inside, but solid all the way through. We continue toward the Red Sea. And just up ahead, we can barely see the Gulf of Aqaba. As we continue our approach, the wadi or canyon seems so narrow from afar, but now it can be seen to be large enough for the vast multitude to have traveled through. And across the sea, we can see the large beach area on the Egyptian side. Just as the beach on the Egyptian side is certainly large enough to accommodate several million people, here we can see that this beach also contains a tremendous plain. In Exodus 14, verse 30, we read, "Thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the sea shore." In 1984, when Ron and his sons were imprisoned here in Saudi, Ron directed his captors to this beach in a helicopter, where he showed them a Phoenician-style column on this beach with inscriptions in archaic Hebrew that said that King Solomon had erected this column in honor of Yahweh to commemorate the crossing of the Red Sea on dry land. Today, all that remains there is this marker noting the location of that column, and while we do not know where they have taken it, we feel sure it is protected and will be located soon. As we look out into the sea, we can see the end of the tongue of the underwater land bridge, and that it leads across to this very beach just beyond where the column once rested. Panning the beach, we also can see the restored remains of the ancient fortress we believe was Baal Zephon of the biblical account. In October of 1988, Ron returned to Israel to begin excavation again after an absence of several years on the Ark of the Covenant. Since the last time Ron had worked there, the Department of Antiquities had had a complete turnover of personnel and policy. Permits to excavate were tough to get for institutions and tougher still for individuals. But Ron took his crew over and went to apply. He had been told years earlier that his permit to excavate the site was permanent. However, it didn't look so good this time. So he reapplied, and for 3 weeks they all waited. Finally, Ron took the crew to the Mediterranean Sea at Ashkelon to go for a swim in October. Here, Ron stubbed his toe on something in the waist-high water. Diving to see what it was, he discovered the mouth of a giant stone pot. Soon, they discovered the area to be littered with these pots with sealed mouths. Prying one open, they discovered that they were burial pots full of human remains. Ron went directly to the Department of Antiquities with the find. They were greatly excited, for it turned out that these were the ancient Canaanite burial pots of Ashkelon. The great Kathleen Kenyon had bulldozed through the entire Roman level here, searching for the burial site of these ancient people. Yet no one thought of looking just a few hundred feet out in the shallow waters of the Mediterranean. While no one could wonder the significance of this discovery as compared to Noah's Ark or the chariot parts, we must say there is no significance in that respect. However, Ron immediately got his permit to excavate in Jerusalem. Unlike his other projects, Ron was digging in this site based only on a statement he had made one day in 1978 to a head of the Department of Antiquities in Jerusalem. While walking together in this area, they were discussing Roman antiquities when Ron's left hand pointed to a site and he said, "That's Jeremiah's grotto, and the Ark of the Covenant is in there." As soon as the words came out of his mouth, he realized that was the first time he had ever thought about finding the Ark of the Covenant. He had never even researched it, much less thought of the possibility of excavating for it. Immediately his companion said, "That's wonderful. We'll not only furnish you the permit, we'll put you up in a place to stay, have your laundry done, and furnish your meals." But Ron was perplexed. The only reason he was in Jerusalem was because he had gotten severely sunburned while diving for the chariot parts in the Red Sea and had come here to await his Apex ticket back home. He told his friend that first he'd have to go home as he was due back at work, and also he had to figure out why the Ark of the Covenant would be in that location. He came back time and time again with Danny and Ronnie and dug throughout the cave system, having little idea where he was even supposed to look. In 1982, he found out. In January of 1982, after steadily digging in a cave system since 1979, he busted through the rock into a chamber which contained a gold table and several other articles which Ron believed to be from the first temple. Then, further back, he saw the top of a stone case which appeared to be the correct size to contain the Ark of the Covenant. Overwhelmed with emotion and double pneumonia, Ron passed out in that chamber for 45 minutes. He knew what was in that case, but now what? He attempted to photograph it with a Polaroid camera, a 35mm camera, and video. In every case, the photos were a whiteout. He returned home to recover and work until he could afford to return. In May, he borrowed a colonoscope and went back. Drilling a small hole through the case, he was able to see enough to positively identify the contents of the stone case. It was the Ark.
On January 6th, 1982 at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I broke into a chamber beneath the Calvary escarpment north of the city wall of Jerusalem. In that chamber is the Ark of the Covenant, the table of showbread, and several other things that I didn't see. They were covered with animal skins, with boards, and then with stones. We had excavated down that escarpment. We had found 3 cutouts in the wall like a recessed bookcase. We know from the valley north of Jerusalem that the ancient kings and rulers cut these things out in cliffs near populous areas or where a lot of people would be going by, and they put plaques of stone and whatever else in there bearing messages. We found the cutouts. We found the cross holes. If you read in the book of Matthew and the Gospels where it talks about Christ's death, it says the earth shook violently and the rocks were rent. Right to the left of the cross hole at the base of where Christ died on the cross, the rock was rent. After Christ died and the centurion stuck his spear into Christ's spleen and the blood and water came out, it went down through that crack. It went on to the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant that God had arranged to be hidden in that chamber 600 years before Christ died. Now, what is the significance of this? Psalm 77:13 says, "Thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary." On the Day of Atonement, the goat that represented Christ as the sin bearer, after all of the sins were figuratively transferred to its head, was killed. Its blood was taken into the most holy place and sprinkled on the mercy seat. Those folks looked forward to the fact that Christ would die. They confessed their sins on the head of lambs and took the lives of these innocent little animals. We, by faith, believe that Christ has indeed died, and we, in praying to God in Christ's name, receive forgiveness of our sins by faith in that fact. North of the city wall in Jerusalem, several feet below the current ground level, rests a perfect explanation and demonstration of the Old Covenant, the sacrificial system, and the New Covenant. You and I are living in the most exciting time in Earth's history. We have an opportunity to blend our voices with the voices of our fellow believers in raising the last warning message to planet Earth. And let me say this, friend, as we happily contemplate the thought of Christ taking us away from this place and that we do not get struck by the 7 last plagues, if when you think of those pleasant things and the pleasant prospects for the Christians, if you are not concerned for your neighbors and your family and loved ones and other people's families and loved ones, those for whom Christ died, who are every bit as important to him as you and I are, then you won't be whisked off anywhere. We have to have the same loving, tender heart that Christ has. We cannot feel that we are more important, we're better than others. You can be used of God to save souls, and there's no greater privilege and honor that a human being can have than that. So you may not be on the platform tonight, but you're on God's platform, and he wants you to help him.
Well, isn't God good to us?
He hid all of this from prying eyes, prevented Satan and his angels and his followers from destroying it, and now he's presenting it to the world at a time we have the technical abilities to do that. So God does everything perfectly. And all of us have had the frustration of trying to convince somebody the Bible is true with basically no proof, you know. Well, now God has provided the proof. And as we ask Him to prepare us and give us opportunities to witness to other people, we need to use these things, okay? Not because God gave me the opportunity of getting them together, but because they're things that He wants us to have and to use. Now, our system of doing things is that we're still digging, okay? And there's some real expenses involved in archaeological excavations. In fact, it'll take millions of dollars to do Noah's Ark. I'm not sure if we'll even get to do it. You know, Christ made a comment. He says, they have Moses and the prophets. If they don't believe these, neither would they believe the one were sent to them from the dead. So God knows exactly what He wants shown to everybody. I don't. You see, He's proving what we are inside. Anybody can put on a pretty good show outside, but we cannot deceive God. He knows what's going on in our minds. And so He is sorting out among the people, and He knows who is doing things to try to impress other people, and He knows who is doing things because they love God and because God has put a love for other people in them. Now, if there's anything I could say to you today, hoping that you would remember it, it's this. God says, he that cometh to me, I will in no wise cast out. And so we go to Him on our own behalf. But if you want a much easier and more successful Christian life, ask Him to help you know, understand, and be able to explain to others in a humble, caring manner everything that will be useful to help these people come to Him in the name and blood of His Son and be saved. Pray that prayer. Read your Bible prayerfully, and God will give you the opportunity of bearing witness to people. And some of the very best experiences I have had, and there's 3 of them in the book that we have in the back, when God arranges an appointment, we know that that individual or somebody they influence or both will be in heaven. I can go knock on people's doors. I can, talk to them in parking lots or whatever. That's not a real safe practice nowadays. But maybe they'll benefit from it, and maybe they won't. But if God arranges the get-together, and if they come to you and ask, and you have a true contact with God, not a pretended one, then those individuals will get to heaven. And that's the greatest joy that any of us can have. And if God can use us to work for others, then He does what is needed in our lives. If we're just doing it to try to get to heaven ourselves and to miss the punishment of the wicked, it doesn't work at all, okay? Now, on this handout, there's some Bible texts, and again, this is free. And we have prices on our material. We've given a special for the occasion to Gwen and you wonderful people here. If you cannot afford it, we will make arrangements for you to have it anyway, okay? But please be honest, because we want to be able to get this stuff dug up and documented as quickly as possible. Things are getting more hostile over there all the time, and I'm not getting any younger, okay? it gets more difficult. But on the Ark of the Covenant, now all of these other things are wonderful. God preserved them. They are effective. We get letters from people whose children are going back to church, believing. We got a letter from a lady in Alaska whose husband had run off with a 19-year-old girl, left her and her 5 children. Somehow he got a hold of one of these books and read it. We got a letter from her. She said he had come home and he was a better husband and father than he had ever been before. Now, everybody can't do what Sister Gwen does here. Some of us, our opportunities come one person at a time, one divine encounter at a time. The Bible says, God says, he that is faithful in that which is least will be faithful also in that which is much. So, folks, don't save your energy or whatever you save to do some great work for the Lord. The greatest work that we can do for the Lord is to allow him to speak through us to some lost soul so that they can be saved. And after he works with us for a while, he'll give us opportunities maybe to talk to larger numbers of people. Now, in Isaiah 26, chapter 26, verse 19, it says, thy dead men shall live. Together with my dead body shall they awake. Awake and sing, ye that sleep in the dust. For your dew shall be as the dew of herbs, and the earth shall cast out her dead. Now, in Matthew 27, beginning at the 50th verse and going through the 53rd, and all of these are on this handout, so you won't need to remember them, memorize them. It says that when Christ had cried again, he died. And the veil of the temple was rent in twain from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks were rent, and the graves were opened, and many of the saints arose. And it says, when he arose, they arose, and went into the city and were seen of many. Folks, when Christ... blood fell on that mercy seat, all of us were bought and paid for.
Yes. Yes.
Now, another few verses here. 1 John chapter 5, verses 7 and 8. It says, there are 3 that bear witness in heaven, God the Father, the Word, which is Christ, and the Holy Ghost. And it says, and there are 3 in the earth that bear witness, the Spirit, the blood, and the water. I've seen that blood. I have taken samples of it. It's been analyzed. It's unique. The individuals whose blood fell on that mercy seat had a mother, but no earthly father. Some of you are aware of genetics. In a normal conception, the mother provides 23 chromosomes. These are all X chromosomes. The father provides 23. There has to be at least one Y chromosome in there to produce a male child, okay? That's determined by the father. In Christ's blood, there was 23 X chromosomes and one Y. It was not a human father. But anyway, all of this will be shared. You'll get to see the sample taken by geneticists, processed through the electron microscope, you'll get to watch via the video camera as they're doing the analysis and counting the chromosomes. There are those today that on television are saying that Christ's mother was not a virgin, that she belonged to this Assyrian group, and that they lived together for 4 years before they got married, and during that 4 years they were referred to as virgins. Okay, Satan is hard at work to totally do away with the truth of what God has done for us. However, God has provided positive proof of what he did. And those that love the truth, he will get the truth to each of us. Okay. Now then, there's a statement in Daniel chapter 9, I think verses 24, 25. It talks about, it says there are 70 weeks that are determined upon your people. You know, in other words, this was during that time, everything was to be accomplished that Christ was going to accomplish. And the very last thing that it mentions, it says, and anoint the most holy. If you look this up in the Hebrew, your Hebrew lexicon, you'll find that it's the same word that is used for the most holy place in the earthly sanctuary in Solomon's temple. Now then, the anointing oil, okay, that's fine. But the only anointing that had any real meaning was the blood of Christ. And that he did. It's history. There are people in heaven today as absolute proof that this occurred. It's not a fantasy. It's not something people tell to get you to cooperate with them and things they want you to do. It is God's truth. Okay. So anyway, I believe that there will be a copy of this tape available out there, not from me, but from Sister Gwen's folks at outside the door. We do have some videos over to our booth, but not of this presentation. It has copyrighted material from ABC, CBS, and that sort of thing. But it can be done in this manner. There's a law that says that nonprofit organizations can reproduce a reasonable amount of it. So you're within the law to do it this way, but I couldn't sell it to you personally. Okay, I would avail myself of that. You know, all of us have families that we love. We have friends that we love and we would like to convince to give their hearts to the Lord. But folks, all these people remember the pit from which we were digged. And they are disinclined to listen to what we have to say. You know, they remember back when. And so anyway, these materials will bear a witness to your family and loved ones that will be effective. Much more effective than if you tried to explain it to them yourself. Also, we're supposed to use the best evidence that we have. That's right. We're not supposed to use hearsay evidence if eyewitness evidence is available, okay? So we're doing people an injustice if we just simply say, the Bible says this and you've got to believe it, when God has provided absolute proof that it is in the Bible and it's true, and they will believe it. Now, all of you remember the woman at the well. Christ told her when she offered him water, he says, you know, that I can give you water so you'll never thirst again. And basically he showed her that he was a prophet and more than a prophet. Well, she was so excited, she ran back into town. This lady had lived with 5 different men, so you can imagine how much respect she had in her little village there. None. But she talked these people into going out and listening to Christ. And afterwards, they said to the lady, well, we believe, not because you told us, but because we have heard and seen for ourselves. And so there are a lot of people that won't believe just because you and I tell them. But when they see for themselves, the Holy Spirit can work through that and convince them of the truth and can do for them what they have to have done to be saved. Folks, you and I cannot save anybody. I know the Heimlich maneuver. I put people to sleep for surgery, wake them all up for 24 years. But when it comes to their eternal life, all I can do is point them to God in the name and blood of his Son. So any of us that try to attract people to us, to get their attention directed at us, we are ripping them off big time. We need to be pointing all these individuals to God, who cares for them, who is smart and powerful enough to save them. Because all of us have had a totally different experience. We've lived on this planet together, but folks, it has been different and unique for every one of us. And God knows how to start from where you are and prepare you and me for an eternal life with him. And he wants to use us to influence others to come to him and be saved. That's what it's all about. And we would not ever have to be ashamed of bearing witness of these things, because they are true. You may run into people, and you will, that will say nasty things about Ron Wyatt. That's not a problem. But remember, you saw these things yourself. Take home as much of it as you can. And again, if you can't afford it, we'll work something out.